So 20 years ago, the 5 biggest ISPs in North America had a problem. The internet had been deregulated for a few years, and the internet was growing quite rapidly at the time. But we had a scaling issue, and that had to do with the fact that the edge of those 5 networks resided in 5 different buildings. And so what you had to do was run a metro circuit, usually back then it was an OC3, from building to building. I was actually an engineer, and I used to do that work. And let me tell you, it was painful. It took months and months to get them turned up. They fell down all the time. And people probably remember that era. Outages on the internet were sort of almost like, you expected it to happen. And so those ISPs issued an RFP saying, we're not facilities-based telcos, so we don't have the meet-me rooms for voice that the incumbent carriers had at the time. Could someone build us a facility that we could build into once, and then the interconnection function, bridging the edge, because the internet is the network of networks. No network goes everywhere, so the internet is everybody's network together. And so we did that, and that is what is Ashburn, Virginia. And oftentimes everybody in the digital economy knows Ashburn. It's a very small town, but it's very important as far as the internet's concerned. And the funny thing was, and the founders of the company actually expected this, was not just to build a meet-me room, but to build a proper data center where other people could come in and take the edge of what they were doing and join the ecosystem. And so the joke is, after the network showed up, the next day, the content providers, who also sat in their own data centers, said, well, wait a minute, why would I buy a circuit to my building and pay tens of thousands of dollars when I could just sit in the same building as the ISPs and dump the content directly into the internet exchange? Seems like a good idea, especially settlement-free peering. Expensive to free is a good value proposition. And so all the content guys showed up. And this really had to do with the digitization of the content community. And today, nobody thinks anything about Netflix or Amazon Prime and all the various things that we get over streaming services. The next thing that happens, you fast forward a few years, and the financial community goes away from the traditional hoot and holler standing on a trading floor to this thing called algorithmic trading. And at that time, I actually worked for a company that built financial networks, and we completely missed the boat. Us and BT Radiance. I worked for Satis. Because a couple of algo engines got into a couple of data centers, and they realized when they were close to each other, they made way more money. And Equinix built what is today the Secaucus campus. And if you are in the algorithmic trading business, you are all either in our campus in Secaucus or our campus in Slough, because that business is all about microseconds and sitting right on top of each other. So the financial community brought their edge against each other. And then this cloud thing starts happening about, give or take, 10 years ago, the very beginnings of it. And what does the cloud need? The cloud needs, essentially, traffic from all these various different networks to pull into their data centers. And to do that, they come in to our facilities. And then finally, we get to the last step, which is the fact that the enterprise is now a huge adopter of cloud. And to reach the cloud, they want the edge of their network to touch the cloud providers. And so now you have a very vibrant ecosystem of players in that community, in our buildings all over the world. So fast forward, we have 200 plus data centers, 52 metros in the 3 major regions around the world. And I won't read you the stats on the left-hand side. You can figure out that and read it yourself. What I'll draw your attention to is the interconnect number at the top. So when I explained all that before, this is where we are today, 300 plus thousand interconnects. Those are pairs of fiber that connect one entity to another entity in that extended ecosystem of companies. The Internet Exchange now peaks out at 10 terabits per second, so that's public peering, down from starting at one site all the way up to that today. And there's about 10,000 different companies. And you can see 2,000 plus of them are enterprises. So this is not just a service provider sort of a game. Everybody gets into it. And then this is the fun part. So this I'll let this build in the background. This basically is showing you cross-connect growth from 2002 to 2015 inside of Equinix. And what you'll notice as it builds is that in the beginning, the networks were a disproportionate number of players, because really they were the ones doing most of the business together. And as you see, as it builds, enterprise and cloud become an increasingly larger portion of what's happening. In the financial services business, of course, algo trading is the only way trading occurs at this point in time. And the interesting thing about that period, just to give you a perspective, is that was averaging about 2,000 cross-connects per month over that period, which is an astounding number when you think about it. So what are companies doing inside of these Equinix facilities by bringing their edges together? What are they doing? Well, it's creating digital disruption. And I'm not going to talk about every single one of these customers. These are all customers of Equinix. But I always like the ones that people, of course, like to call out. You know, the world's largest transportation companies own no cars. The world's largest communications platforms own no network. And the biggest booker of hotel rooms doesn't own a hotel. Well, I guess private rooms. Truly disruptive because of their access to the edge of all of these various networks, their ability to host these services inside of cloud providers, or to stage their IT equipment in a company like Equinix. But there are other trends. Digital business is the first thing that I talked about. Obviously, urbanization. I think I read a stat the other day that said now, for the first time, the planet has achieved more people live in cities than not. And it becomes easier to interconnect folks. Cybersecurity. Now that all this information sits in the cloud in multiple places all around the world, the security perimeter for any given enterprise is rather large. And so you have to defend against all sorts of intrusions and attacks from multiple directions. Data compliance. In Europe, we have GDPR. People want their data for their country local to where they are. And so that requires edges in every single country. And then finally, and this is kind of where we start to get into the rest of our guests today, is the idea of digital ecosystems. The edge is not a one-company thing. I've been talking about the data center component of that, but the reality is to deliver true value to our end customers, the enterprises and consumers, it's a layering of companies working together to achieve this. And so we change the paradigm architecturally. We go from sort of siloed and fixed, very hierarchical, to very dynamic. And the easiest way I've been able to think about how you explain this to people is you flip the architecture. It used to be the edge was the small part, and the core was the main thing that you worried about. You had a data center in the middle and a network that spanned all around the world to branch offices. Now, you go down to the bottom part of the picture, the edge is everything. All of the IT systems hosted in various different clouds, whether it's hybrid or multi-cloud, means the edge is everywhere in your network because you get better performance if the app sits closer to the end user. So this shouldn't surprise anybody. And I'll leave you with this. So most people are familiar, if you're familiar with Cisco, they do a little piece of work called the VNI, the Virtual Networking Index. Because they sell so many routers to so many different types of companies, they have a particular perspective. Because we manage 330,000 interconnects, we have a very interesting perspective on what's happening. And interconnection bandwidth is our way of measuring what's happening at the edge. Every single time two companies want to deal with each other, we keep track of that. And what you can see is that over the next couple of years, the amount of interconnection bandwidth is expected to go up almost by 50%. So the point of all of this is to say the edge isn't something that's about to happen. It's been happening.